everyone, and welcome to Spirit Basics, the show for both the beginner and the avid connoisseur of fine spirits. I'm Jennifer Allan.
And I'm Stephen Olson. In today's episode, we're going to take a closer look at the category of gin.
Now, we know in the old days, gin is the main ingredient for some classic cocktails, but can you tell us a little bit more about the origin of gin?
Well, you're absolutely right. It was the base for so many of our most important classic cocktails. The origins we're going to have to go back in history just a little bit. We're going all the way back to the 1600s, and we're going to visit Holland. We're going to stop by an alchemist by the name of the infamous Dr. Sylvius, a man actually named Franciscus de la Boe. And Dr. Sylvius was actually a very, very important physician of his time. But one of his most important contributions to society was creating a drink he called jenever. Jenever is actually the Dutch word for juniper. Like many of the drinks we've talked about before, this one was for medicinal purposes. And in this particular case, believe it or not, jenever, juniper, is supposed to be healing your kidney ailments. Now, Holland is the center for the spice roots, so this man had access to many of these great botanicals like juniper. The English soldiers found the Dutch soldiers drinking what they called Dutch courage and later brought it back to England in the 1800s. With the advent of continuous distillation, it becomes known as London Dry Gin.
And how does this London Dry Gin become such an important ingredient in the classic cocktail?
Well, it came from England to the United States probably for the first time in the 1870s when it became popular in the Tom Collins. Our master mixologist, Dale Degroff, will be here later to talk a little bit more about this history of cocktails. But just briefly, in the early 1900s, we saw the martini become incredibly popular. That's when it began. And then, of course, at Prohibition time, we couldn't really drink bathtub gin in martinis, so we created recipes to cover up the volatility of bathtub gin. See, we couldn't get our premium spirits from England anymore, so we had to make our own. Now, interestingly enough, vodka took over gin's role as the #1 white spirit in America in the 60s. And of course, as you know, vodka has become the most important and most popular cocktail beverage spirit in the world. But recently, in the last 15 years or so, gin has made a huge comeback, partially because of this return of the classic cocktail. But now, not only is it coming back, and not only are these classic cocktails coming back, we're actually seeing super premium gins come back to the marketplace.
Wow. Well, for more history on gin, we turn now to our master mixologist, Dale Degroff.
Gin is an old story in the New World, going all the way back to that 1600s distillery in New Amsterdam that William Kieft made gin in, and that the English used later to make rum. And we liked the sweetened kind of gin in the 19th century in this country. It was called Old Tom. It was a London dry gin to which simple syrup was added. And a lot of our early cocktails, and by the way, the first cocktails were three. As published in 1862 in that famous Cherry Thomas How to Mix Drinks. The brandy cocktail, the whiskey cocktail, and the gin cocktail. Gin was in on the beginning. And one of the very first style cocktails was a martini-like cocktail used with Curacao bitters and gin. Later, vermouth took over the place of the Curacao and became the mixer with gin. And it also took over the place of the Curacao in the whiskey cocktail. And those early gin martinis were very sweet affairs with sweet gin and sweet ingredients in them. It wasn't until the turn of the 19th to the 20th century at the Knickerbocker Hotel in New York City that we came across our first dry martini, but let me tell you the recipe. Half Plymouth gin, which was the first popular dry gin in this country, and half French vermouth, the marriage of those two things for the first time, and a dash of orange bitters, a far cry from a dry martini today. Well, the martini took a long hiatus during Prohibition because the gin was so terrible we had to mix it with all kinds of sweet juice ingredients to make it even palatable. All it was really bad alcohol to which juniper oil was added. After Prohibition, the evolution of the martini continued with what I like to call the thin man martini. Nick and Nora in movies stirring those pitchers of martinis as they went through the exposition of the story. And those were 3-to-1 usually. 3 parts gin to 1 part vermouth. And it seemed as things heated up in the 20th century, the Second World War, the Cold War, the martinis got stronger and stronger until we were up to 11-to-1 after the Second World War and during the Cold War. And then we had the big move away from gin to vodka in what I call the James Bond martini. So the martini is still, by the way, an evolving drink and not so much involving gin anymore. In the new millennium, we've taken a new step in the evolution of the martini because the martini now has come really to mean pretty much any cocktail that we put in that beautiful V-shaped glass. But that's not the end of the story for gin, because gin is starting to come back. What I call new wave gins, aimed at a younger audience with less of that juniper top note, more citrus, and more flavors that appeal to a younger crowd. The story's not over.
Up next, we're going to take a closer look at the fascinating distillation process behind gin.
And our own spirit insider, Scott Henuset, takes a trip to a flair bartending competition to learn more about gin. That's when Spirit Basics returns.
Welcome back to Spirit Basics. It's time now to take a little closer look at the process behind making gin.
Now, as you mentioned earlier, one of the main ingredients in gin is juniper berries, but there has to be other flavors there.
There are a lot of other flavors. Some of them have as many as 12 or 15, but they're proprietary blends. They don't want to tell us what they are, but I can tell you what some of them are. Juniper, of course, being the principal ingredient. Even the name gin is a shortened yennephra, which means juniper in Dutch. But almost all gins will have some sort of citrus, lemon or orange, which we take for granted today, but in the 1600s, that would have been a very exotic ingredient to add in. And that's what we're looking for, not only medicinal, but to make it more sought after and more exotic. Coriander is a very popular spice found in many of these, and I mean the coriander seed, which of course is the seed for the cilantro plant, but doesn't taste anything like cilantro. Anise and or licorice, which are two completely separate items, although anise flavors licorice sometimes, the candy licorice. Cassia bark, orris root, angelica, you know, things you'd use in the kitchen all the time.
So do they flavor gin the same way that they would flavor vodka?
That's actually a very good question, and in some cases I would say yes, but you know, I actually spoke about bathtub gin earlier, and I have to go there. When we talked about flavoring vodka, we talked about the different ways you add flavors, and in gin, generally speaking, we believe that the best gins use a third and or fourth or even a fifth distillation where they, after making a neutral grain spirit, they add the botanicals through a separate distillation. But this bathtub gin thing, basically imagine moonshine in a large demijohn, a glass jug, right? Now, if you started with a small jug you carried over your shoulder and you know that it's 190 proof moonshine and you have to dilute it down to 95 proof, which coincidentally is the proof behind gin, you need to add water. And you can't put that demijohn under your sink, so you put it under the bathtub. Many people think you actually made it in the tub. No, it's just that's where we use the water from. But the idea is you'd add juniper syrup, an eyedropper full of juniper syrup into our Everclear and water, and we've got bathtub gin. Not exactly elegant, so we created cocktail recipes to soften the volatility of this spirit.
Well, let's get an even more technical look at gin when we turn to our spirit guide.
Hey, if we're going to hand out credit, why don't we hand out some credit to Arnaud de Villanova as well? Yeah, the guy the university is named after, okay? He's a 12th century philosopher, an African, who has gone to Salerno, Italy, probably, that's what we think, and that's where he learned to make distillation. He brought it back to Spain and really wrote about it and discovered new ways to distill and tried to retain the medicinal property of juniper, amongst others, but that's really what he hung his hat on. And he called his product aqua vitae, or water of life. And that's a term that's going to show up all through this series, of course, because lots of other languages utilize this. So he was trying to take the diuretic properties of juniper and retain them inside this spirit. Now, while we're talking about juniper, obviously we're talking about gin, let's talk about the other botanicals as well. I mean, I'd certainly say that coriander is at least as important in your botanicals shopping list as juniper is. One way or the other, no matter which of these botanicals you use, and the lemon peel and the orange peel and all this other stuff, orris root and all that stuff, you've made a decision to extract certain flavors. Now, do you put those botanicals inside the still for your generally third distillation so that it's right inside the still, or do you put them in a gin head right up above the still? Or let's say in the case of Bombay Sapphire, do you put that gin head down the line arm a little bit? So now it's just the steam that's going through there, so you're getting a lighter extraction. You're making that decision based on the flavors that you want in your gin. So each of those is a step, a way of deciding how much flavor you want to extract.
Well, we've had a chance to take a look at the history, the origins, the distillation process of gin. Let's take an inside look.
And our spirit insider, Scott Henuset, is on the hunt for knowledge about gin. His journey takes him to a flair bartending competition.
We're here at the Tequila nightclub for the Flair bartending competition. Now, these guys make a lot of drinks while they're tossing their bottles around. Let's see if they use gin in any of them. Was the movie Cocktail a big influence on this industry?
I think it was maybe about 15 years ago, but I mean, what they did in that movie is so bland and basic.
So now, what do you think is the main ingredients for a good flair bartender?
Showmanship.
One of the classic cocktails is a martini. Do you think any of the guys will be making that tonight?
I'm pretty sure a couple are.
What do you think better, vodka martinis or the classic gin martinis?
Well, vodka tends to be a little more smooth. I mean, the younger crowd that comes into the bars nowadays, gin to them is an old person's drink, and I think that's why vodka sells as better as a martini.
What about gin? Why is gin falling off so much?
The gin's a really harsh tasting drink, I think. It's made from juniper berries, so it kind of tastes like pine needles. That might be why.
So you don't like the pine needle?
No, myself personally, no.
So now, if you were gonna make a classic martini, let's just go back to plain old gin, how would you make that martini?
Personally, I like it a little bit burnt, so I rim the glass with scotch, and I like it a little bit dirty, so I like a little bit of olive brine in it. So you take your premium gin, put in like 2.5 ounces, a little splash of vermouth, a little dollop of olive brine, and then pour it into the poured glass. It's wonderful.
We saw a lot of bottles flying and a lot of people talking, but we didn't see a lot of gin. But I think with all the different flavored gins in the market now, we're gonna see it soon. Back to you, Steve and Jennifer.
Straight ahead, we continue our look at gin, how to drink it, and how to use it in some of your favorite cocktails. It's coming up when Spirit Basics returns.
Spirit Basics is brought to you in part by Willow Park Wines and Spirits.
Welcome back to Spirit Basics, the show for everyone who wants to learn more about your favorite cocktails. Right now, we're going to talk about the proper way to drink gin.
Well, let me just clarify, as we always do, there are no rules or regulations about how you consume your spirit. And certainly gin is great in many classic cocktails, and of course the martini. But one of my favorite drinks and one of my favorite stories is the gin and tonic, and it's one of the oldest classic cocktails. If we think back to the British occupation of India, maybe in the 1850s or so, the British soldiers were fighting a couple of diseases, in particular malaria and scurvy. Now to this day, the only known natural antidote for malaria is quinine, which is from the bark of the cinchona tree. The only known natural antidote for scurvy is vitamin C, which of course comes from citrus fruit. Now imagine if you were given those two items as daily rations. It wouldn't take you long to figure out that a little bit of mother's milk from the homeland, blended in with my quinine water and my limes, would certainly make my rations go down much easier and be a very pleasant experience. And imagine how much better you could perform your military duties if you had a little bit of a gin glow working. The gin and tonic is born.
And I do love a gin and tonic.
Who doesn't?
For more on how to drink gin, we're joined now by our spirit advisor.
Gin. I mean, who drinks gin anymore? Well, I do. Okay, I love gin. I love the flavors of gin. I love that peppery character. I love that wild, pungent, juniper, evergreen, Christmas tree smell that you get from a really great classic gin. But gin's problem, in frankness, is this issue of too much flavor, too much information, man. It is not a blank slate like vodka is, and it doesn't allow bartenders to be quite as, or at least they don't feel that they're being quite as creative as they'd otherwise be. But for me, I mean, how can I celebrate summer without a gin and tonic? It is the message to me that I am now off work. Today is my day off and I'm having a gin and tonic right now and I feel pretty good about it all. Again, that pepperiness, that Christmas, that lemon lime character that I get. And sure, the bite of the tonic water. I like that. That's part of its refreshing character. But you don't like the bite of the tonic water? I understand. That's fine. Maybe you want to have a gimlet. Gimlets are good. Maybe you just like martinis. I mean, to me, the classic martini must always be based on gin. You want to have it with vodka, that's fine, that's your business. But I like the message of gin, that earthy character, all the complexity that you get from all these other flavors. But gin, there's no question that gin's day has waned from once long ago when it was a very, very important cocktail ingredient, when it was a very important spirit, before the orange blossom was supplanted by the screwdriver and the red snapper was supplanted by the Bloody Mary. But think of it this way, it's really just a kind of flavored vodka.
The king of cocktails, Dale Degroff, joins us now and shows us how to make a drink using gin. Over to you, Dale.
Well, according to this guy, oh, wait a minute, that's me. The graphics of the cocktail. The Singapore Sling, created at the Long Bar in the Raffles Hotel in Singapore in 1915. Anyway, in the 90s, when I was not sure if I had the right recipe, I sent the fax to Raffles Bar in Singapore, and I got an answer back that, yeah, my recipe was the right one. So the one I'm going to give you is the one they use in Singapore. It's the one drink that when bartenders start to make it, or they get an order for it, you always hear the bartenders talking to each other behind the bar going, Singapore Sling, man, I think something red in it. What do we got that's red? You know, it's a very misunderstood drink. I'm going to show you the real, wonderful, and often forgotten recipe for the Singapore Sling. We're going to start with a little fresh lime juice, half to a quarter of an ounce of fresh lime juice. Since we have a sour, we need a little bit of sweet, and that'll give us a little color too. And actually, we have modifiers in this drink that are also sweet ingredients. We have an orange liqueur, which we've used before, called Cointreau, which is actually, it's a triple sec, proprietary brand of triple sec is all it is. I'm only going to use a quarter of an ounce of it. And I'm going to use a quarter of an ounce of a very spicy, herbal, very old liqueur. I think there's only one that's older than this, chartreuse probably, made going back to the Middle Ages. This is by the monks. And a quarter of an ounce, just a little bit, Benedictine. And then I'm going to use cherry brandy. Traditionally, they would use something called Peter Herring cherry herring. And in this case, I'm going to use Pulaska cherry brandy. Maybe a half ounce, a little bit more. The base of the drink, it's gin. Bombay. So this is my shot. Ounce and a half, whatever your shot happens to be. The juice, besides a little bit of fresh lime juice, is pineapple. Use unsweetened pineapple. If you can get fresh, that would be wonderful. Let's shake it up. By the way, this sling is a very old category of cocktail. It goes back to before the cocktail was even a category itself. The sling, the cocktail was originally called a bittered sling. In other words, a sling to which bitters were added. And by the way, while we're talking about bitters, let's put a little aromatic bitters also in our Singapore Sling. And then let's shake it up. That famous magical seal. And I'm going to garnish with the ingredients that are in the drink. I'm going to put a little bit of fresh pineapple, a little cherry, a little orange for color. Look how beautiful this is. Oh, yes. Look at the color. Wouldn't you order that drink? I'd order it. I'd order about 3 of them, as a matter of fact. It's wonderful. And I'm going to leave a little room for the garnish here. Look at the traditional classic Collins glass. It looks great in there. Just a little piece of pineapple, a little cherry, and a slice of orange. Look at the foam. The foam is created by the shaking of the pineapple juice. Beautiful on top. Serve it with some long, tall straws. And I think on a hot summer day, this would go down really nicely, Singapore Sling. Well, you may have to go all the way to Singapore to get it made right, Jennifer, Stephen. Salute.
You know, we're always talking about classic cocktails. And of course, they're made with classic spirits. And of those spirits, gin may very well be the most important of all.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
After the break, we're going to head into the kitchen to see what we can cook up with gin. That's when Spirit Basics returns. Welcome back to Spirit Basics. We're in the kitchen now with our Spirit Chef, Chef Allan. Thanks for joining us today.
Great to be back, Jennifer.
Now today you're going to tell us about the different kinds of dishes that we can make using gin. Now gin is typically, it's an acquired taste, but how does that come into play when deciding on using it with some of the recipes?
Well, the acquired taste of gin really is a strength when it's cooking because it's got a juniper berry taste and sometimes a strong, almost an oily citrus taste. So some people can't take it on their palate straight or with little mix, but in food, that berry and that richness and the citrus really makes a big difference. So gin actually, to my palate anyway, is not something you have to get used to when you're cooking.
Okay, well we have a couple examples here. Can you tell us about these dishes?
Well, these are really good examples of what gin brings to a dish. This first dish here that I've got in front of me is a trout dish, and it's got a bunch of flavors in it, some mushrooms, some nutmeg, and those types of spices and earthy things go really well with the juniper berries. The other dish we have here is just a classic gin chicken, and this has got some caramelized onions cooked very slowly. It's got about 1/4 cup of gin in this one and just a shot in this one, but you can really taste the flavors, and that's also got a little bit of bay leaf and stuff in it, so it really enhances everything.
Okay, I have a question. When you're deciding on cooking with any spirit, you said that there's a shot of gin in this one, 1/4 cup of gin in this recipe. How do you decide how much should go in each recipe?
Well, that's a great question, and I sort of gave away the answer, but on this one we're just sort of finishing the dish with the spirit, or in this case the gin, and so we just gave it a shot, usually towards the end of the dish. Whereas when you're cooking something for a longer time, you want a larger quantity, you'll burn off the alcohol, you'll be left with that residue of flavor. So really, it depends on how long you're going to cook the dish for and sort of what you're serving it with. A game, for example, which I've said is good with this, it can be really enhanced by a slow cooking with a lot of gin.
Okay, so fish and game and chicken is great with gin. What about desserts? Because of the juniper berries in the gin, would that be a good pairing?
Well, the juniper berries really sort of add almost a more herbal quality to it, so I think that's better with the meat, but it's the citrus that works great in dessert. So for sure, anything lemon or lime, gin's a great bet.
Great. Well, if you're interested in any of these recipes, just log on to our website. Over to you, Stephen.
Jennifer, thanks again for some great recipes. Well, that's it for this edition of Spirit Basics. Join us next week when we talk about the world of rum. I'm Stephen Olson, and for my co-host Jennifer Allan and the entire crew here at Spirit Basics, we'll see you next week. Pros.
Special thanks to Willow Park Wine and Spirits, whose dedication to providing knowledge, awareness, and service to their customers has made this show possible.